The Lived Experience Network is a group of individuals who all have experience of using Cornwall's mental health services. And we say that that's lived experience. And they're a network of individuals who want to use this experience to improve Cornwall Mind's mental health services. So going into places like the NHS, telling people about what they experienced and sharing that so that the experience of other people in the future can be improved. Maybe I can break that down and explain the structure or the role of experts by experience. And I don't put that in quotation marks because it's not true that they're experts. I put it in quotation marks because it is a term that is used generally and that's kind of had consensus and been agreed upon at a high level across the country for people with lived experience who are doing this kind of work. So people with lived experience going into the council or going into the NHS and sharing their experience. So to develop projects called or are often termed experts by experience. And that is because there may be a panel of experts there, doctors, social workers, nurses, who all have expertise in their field. However, the voices that we are amplifying and empowering are those who are actually experts in what's happening on the ground, experts by experiencing what it is like to have a mental health condition and to be treated or seek support for that. And they've gained those expertise and they may know so much about the system that those professionals standing there in the room or sitting there in the room don't realise. Simple things like, for example, I was listening to a podcast the other day that used the example of actually a waiting room for a mental health service was so bare and so bland and the seats were so uncomfortable that anyone who was anxious or sweaty would just be increasingly uncomfortable as they were sat on them. And they were all different colours and all different, and the waiting room itself was hidden behind doors. And so the whole experience of trying to find the place to go for your mental health assessment was extremely stressful and quite uncomfortable. And that sets people back in their stead. And the clinicians, when they were looking at improving this service, would never have thought of the waiting room. They were looking at targets and times and how we do this and how we do that. And they were like, well, for a start, could you put some water in the waiting room so that we don't have to ask for it? Or, could there be cushions on the chairs? And could there maybe be some reading material or some colouring material rather than leaflets about psychosis? Because actually that's provoking my anxiety. And all of this little bits of feedback are the blind spots in when people create services without lived experience that only people with lived experience can share. And you might think some of it is common sense, but it's not. And that's where the expert word comes in, because these expertise are something that can only be gained by going through the services, if that makes any sense. So experts by experience are what we call the people in our lived experience network that go into workshops and go into meetings alongside, we call them statutory services, so the NHS or the council, to share their expertise in what it's like to experience the service they're providing. It's not just about doing, it's about how you do it. And I think we're working on a project called Trusted Assessments, but a big part of that is understanding that it's not just sending a letter, not just sending a summary, but it's what those words say and how those words make someone feel. And often, at least historically, often letters and communications have been quite clinical. Your appointment is at this time, you are still on the waiting list. When actually just a softening of that language, we really appreciate your patience. We really appreciate that this is a stressful time for you. Here is some signposting to other services that can support you in this time, can make all the difference. Because although, again, it's bread and butter for statutory services to be sending out letters, that's someone's life that's being affected by the letter dropping through their postbox. And if that letter makes them feel a little bit safer, that will change the trajectory possibly of their day, possibly of their week, possibly of their months waiting to be seen. And it's mad to think that something, again, so small could have such a big impact, but it really does. And again, blind spot of the people delivering the service, but something that lived experience people can pick up like that. And again, I'm humbled every day by how people with lived experience or our experts by experience can pull out and draw out the practicalities of a service, like how it's actually going to run, how it's actually going to feel for someone on the other end of it, and make those little changes and make those little suggestions that will in the future mean that someone receives that service or receives a communication in a more positive way. And it's slow. We don't see progress at 1,000,000 miles per hour. But when those things do change, it can make a big impact. One of the examples of how lived experience influences the NHS and how our experts by experience enter meetings and workshops and can create change within the NHS is actually a kind of subtle example, and it's around the use of language. And so we had an expert by experience who was brought in to a workshop to discuss stuff to do with risk. So risk is a big word in mental health, and it's something that's really important for clinicians to assess. But the word risk in itself kind of was expressed as feeling like a accusation or a weight on that person, like you are a risk. And they described how much nicer it felt and how much of a shift in the perspective there was, and actually the culture and the thinking around people if you use the word safety. So we want to make sure you're safe rather than we want to assess your risk. And that just simple change of language kind of trickled down and trickled on. And now in many meetings with the NHS, I hear people correct each other, risk, safety. Should we use the word safety rather than risk? And that is something that, again, seems so simple, but makes a monumental change when you're thinking of how care is received and experienced. And that's just an expert by experience reflecting on that and translating that. And then it disseminates like that beautiful butterfly effect through different meetings and different workshops. And it's an example I've been given multiple times by the NHS back to me, like that was a really good bit of reflection. So it's lovely to see how an expert by experience can come into the work and feel safe to express that doesn't sound right, that doesn't feel right to me, and be listened to and heard, and changes happen. I'm actually really excited to share that we are recruiting for experts by experience. Recruiting sounds like a very official word, but we are looking for people to join our lived experience network, to sign up and to get trained up to do the expert by experience role, to go into workshops and meetings with the NHS or the council and services and share their story and their perspective about what really works when it comes to mental health care and mental health support. So if people want to do that, they can go to the Mind website, find our expert by experience or lived experience network page, and there should be a little button there that says apply. If they have any trouble finding that button, then they can just email via the main contact page and they'll be pointed in the right direction. But yeah, it's a really, really exciting thing for me. The first time I'm doing it because I'm fairly new to the role. So it would be great to hear from people. I'd also love to say that when thinking about whether you are an expert by experience, it's not just about whether you think you have enough or sufficient experience with the mental health system to give an opinion on it. Everyone who has sought support with their mental health is someone who has expertise in seeking support. And it may not be you, but it may be a family member or another member of staff, or even if you work in the NHS, it might be yourself or a colleague who you could think, actually, they have a lot of experience, or they have had an experience that could be worthwhile sharing. And we'll give them the support and kind of the path to share that. So I think it's sometimes hard to identify as an expert. I definitely would find that's that tricky with me. I'm like, am I an expert in anything? I think I don't really know anything at all. But anyone with experience of living with a mental health condition or seeking support with their mental health is an expert by experience.